Hello, fellow bridge players and unit board members from the 6 ACBL BC units, Parksville, Victoria, Vancouver, Quesnel, Okanagan, and Kootenay. I am Alan Graves, and I am standing for election to the Canadian Bridge Federation Board of Directors, seeking to represent Zone 6, which is BC. There is a bridge bio of me at the CBF website in the Hall of Fame section, and a more detailed non-bridge bio of me is on a personal informational webpage I use. It's called Alan Graves, ALLANGRAVES.bridgecloud.com. So if you go there, you'll see my Canadian Bridge Federation documents, and I will also post a transcript of this video that I'm making, and the videos themselves will be at that site, allangraves.bridgecloud.com. Now, as most, if not all of you, I am very concerned about the future survival of our game. Duplicate Bridge, which I will call Mindsport Bridge in this presentation, just to remind us that it is a competitive comparison of the participants based on skill. Mindsport Bridge is a small but critical part of what I call the bridge culture. Unfortunately, it is in increasingly rapid decline due to an aging membership, which is now in the low 70s at least, and an inability to attract and retain new Mindsport Bridge members. Clearly, this situation is not sustainable. I have a CBF policy in partnership with the ACBL, a proposal to increase participation. More to the point, I am deeply concerned about the declining interest and participation of the non-Mindsport Bridge world. This is the card game of Rubber Bridge. Now, Rubber Bridge is undoubtedly the world's best card game. It's the mother game, if you will, of all whist games, and it has always functioned as the worldwide ground of our bridge culture. Some reliable sources still place worldwide rubber bridge culture between 100 and 200 million in a world population of close to 8 billion. Regardless, the number is shrinking significantly in the West. My second policy proposal regards how to revive the rubber bridge culture and the role that CBF could play in that. Firstly, let's talk about increasing the participation of our existing members. Basically, the Canadian Bridge Federation operates as a dual mission organization. One is to provide a uniquely Canadian grassroots championship, and second is to nominate and support Canadian participation in the World Bridge Federation and the World Bridge Team Championships. The CBF uses one event, the Canadian National Team Championships, as one tournament to pursue its dual missions. This format has been essentially the same for 40 years, although 10 years ago it consolidated to just one event instead of having zonal playoffs, or I think it started off, there was even club and unit playoffs. But 10 years ago it became one event that was open to anyone who wanted to play. It was divided into flights for the non-top players who are mostly local, and there was a pair game as well. The CBF was also responsible for nominating women's, junior, and senior teams. I assumed a CBF membership of 5,000 and an ACBL Canadian membership of 20,000 and did a rough audit of participation in the last 3 CNTC tournaments. I determined that about 5% of CBF members, and hence 1.25% of ACBL members, participated in the tournament. There's been a steady decline over the years. Since 1980, the CBF has nominated and raised support for about 40 open teams in World Bridge Federation Team Championships. They have always been the winners of the CNTC-A grassroots event. They have won 2 medals, a bronze at the 1982 Olympiad in Biarritz and a silver at the mid-90s Bermuda Bowl. I have no doubt that no CBF board has ever been happy with the participation in the combo grassroots team trials, nor the international results of the open teams. But given the seeming magnitude of the tasks that the CBFs take on, they've actually done a very good job in, particularly in keeping Canada relevant in the WBF. I, for one, have been benefited a lot, and I am very grateful. The problem is that in trying to do two functions, which are quite different in nature, you can end up doing poorly in both. My proposal is for the CBF to separate the CNTC into its two functions, a grassroots championship and an international team trials. How would this work? Well, actually, quite simply. I looked at various Canadian amateur sports, and my research showed a great number of the grassroots Canadian national championships are organized as interprovincial competitions. The Canada Summer Games every 2 years is a competition of summer Olympic events by provincial teams. The Brier for curling and the Wellington Cup for golf are two of the dozens of other interprovincial championships. Basically, they combine a provincial champion and then they determine a provincial champion, and then those 10 provincial teams come together for a national championship and a celebration of their sport. This tried and true framework rides the energy that all Canadians have, which is a quiet pride of not only being Canadian, but in being from a particular province. Recently, I drove home through Canada from the eastern USA, crossing the border in Quebec, and then took the Trans-Canada to Vancouver. It took 6 days, and each day I marveled at what a wondrous and diverse country Canada is, and how grateful I felt to be a Canadian. When I crossed the Rockies into BC, I felt a quiet pride in being a British Columbian. It felt good to resettle in my old neighborhood of Kitsilano Point Grey. To accomplish its mission to have a grassroots championship, the CBF should adopt the interprovincial championship model in a win-win partnership with the ACBL units and the ACBL clubs. I would recommend having 3 flights, an open flight, a second flight, and a third flight. At the provincial grassroots level, it should be a long event, beginning in the clubs with a couple of qualification opportunities, and then a unit semifinal round, resulting in a unit champion for each flight. The provincial final would be a 16-team event with the teams representing the 6 units prorated as to membership. In my view, teams could have 4, 5, or 6 members, all resident in the province and members of both the ACBL and the CBF. If they are from more than one unit, they must play out of the unit where they have a plurality of members, and if those numbers are equal, then play out of the larger unit. The provincial finals could be held at one of our great BC regionals, Penticton or downtown Victoria, for example. That way, spouses and friends could be present and also take part in the regional. Losing teams could take part in the regional. The open provincial champion would participate in the one team per province national team championship. The other 2 flights would culminate in a provincial champion, but there would be no flighted national championship. The international team trials would be a completely separate event managed by an organizational committee. More on that later. This event, the Canadian Bridge Federation Interprovincial Team Championship, would be a true grassroots national championship and celebration. Everyone playing would be proud to represent their province. The eventual winner would be a very proud provincial champion who had brought the national cup home. These are events that the CBF and ACBL could run very well together. There are many advantages to this format. In no particular order, I listed some. All participants would need to be members in some way of the CBF. This would spur the CBF to add value to its current membership, and it would act as an annual membership drive. The valuable services the CBF provides to Canadian Bridge, especially internationally, could be highlighted. Once we have the national team event properly established, provincial governments will often support provincial teams. The media will report on interprovincial events. The availability for all 20,000 ACBL members to participate in one of the flights in their particular championship, beginning in their local clubs and units, would be well received. and it would be further opportunity for the clubs to connect with the bridge community. I have no doubt that the organizational skills of the ACBL units in running these tournaments would be outstanding. The general fun of looking forward each year to the provincials would engage the interest of most everyone. I know it would me. Please note that this does not interfere in any way with those experts who want to also compete in the trials to nominate Canada's international representatives. And lastly, I put down, some of the revenue could be reinvested in a transparent manner in supporting and growing our great game. I want to now anticipate an argument that might arise against having 10 provincial team national final. Some might argue that the larger provinces have more teams. That would be reasonable if the competition was to determine the best team nationwide or a trial situation, but neither is the case here. It is critical that each province be treated equally so that every bridge player in Canada, regardless of whether they are a tournament player or a recreational rubber player, could enjoy the quiet pride of having a provincial champion representing them on equal grounds with the other 9 provinces, and to benefit fully from having an important provincial championship. The provincial participants themselves will aspire to become the team next year, and the inspiration that engenders will pervade that entire provincial bridge community with regards to their bridge. The competition in a big province to win that provincial championship would be spirited. The Division 2 and Division 3 teams could also take pride in supporting its provincial champion in the nationals. I cannot stress that strongly enough, that each province gets one team. The grassroots national championship would generate a lot of goodwill across the Canadian bridge world, in my opinion. Let's talk about the international team trials. The second mission of the CBF is to nominate international teams. This can be very easily done by keeping it simple. First, we must keep in mind that the CBF has a fiduciary duty of sorts to the membership to put Canada's best foot forward, and to do that while having the process be decided at the table. That is to say, to provide a format which is both fair and demanding. It must be said that participation in Canadian International Bridge has always required a personal commitment, sacrifice, and a fair degree of self-funding. That will stay the same. But at the outset, our goal could be reaching the WBF Championship round of 8. Anyone who wishes to participate can apply with a 4, 5, or 6 person team by a certain deadline. An organizational committee of non-participant but experienced experts, ideally with international experience playing for Canada, would then determine the schedule for the trials. The key here is to make it as fair but thorough as possible. This is in no way, shape, or form a selection committee. In my opinion, it might involve area playdowns if there are a lot of applicants. You would want the trials final event to be concentrated and focused. The proper size and length of the trials final would be determined by the committee, perhaps even in consultation with the players. I would recommend that the CBF provide training materials to all teams at the very outset. The trials final should be around mid-August so that training and momentum are maintained for that coming World Championship, which is usually held in mid-fall. The key here is to make sure our teams are properly trained and focused. I would recommend that the CBF select and appoint the captain and approve any augmentation to a 4 or 5 person team, naturally in consultation with that team. Again, the details matter, but I would suspect that the field would be significantly smaller than the CNTCA field, as the quality of the provincial open flight would draw away many experts that might normally have wanted to play in the old CNTCA format. Of course, one can play in both in the provincials and in the trials. Once this format is established and could be seen to be producing better results, then it may be possible to fundraise our donor class or commercial operations for stronger international support. Now I'd like to talk about my second proposal, which is for the CBF to be involved in reestablishing the rubber bridge ecosystem. Excuse me. Let me give you a couple of pieces of information for you to contemplate first. In the late 1950s, a Life magazine article on Charles Gorin stated that 40 million North American households had one or more bridge players. That was from a total national population of about 100 million Americans, 180 million Americans, and 18 million Canadians. That 40 million households were playing contract bridge, the card game, rubber scoring, in their living rooms and kitchens, in golf clubs, winter clubs, social clubs, community centers, senior centers, 55 and up communities, and most anywhere people would gather for recreation. The ACBL membership at that time was at 175,000. Presumably they were playing duplicate bridge, the mind sport. Now that is about 0.5% of 40 million. To help visualize this, imagine a bridge tournament ballroom with 7 14-table sections, 98 tables altogether. Every table but one is playing rubber bridge. Only one is playing duplicate. So let's ask ourselves, where did the new ACBL mind sport players come from back in the day? Well, they came from the experienced rubber bridge players looking for a better game, a stronger peer group. The local ACBL clubs provided exactly that. Experienced card players are always welcome at an ACBL club, as they usually make a seamless transition to the tournament environment, especially now in the age of zero tolerance. Now, where did that rubber bridge culture, where did the new players come for that? Well, the game was just passed on. That was just an organic function. Parents taught their children, friends taught friends, etc. I know that I learned when I was about 10 years old from my parents. They were members of a 3-table revolving bridge club that went to each other's homes on Saturday night. And I remember that because it would revolve through our living room on its appointed Saturday night. And even when I didn't play bridge, I knew that in the fridge the following Sunday morning there'd be leftover goodies. Well, regardless, I started playing bridge from my parents, and then when I was in high school, a number of us played. And it wasn't just geeky sort of people. We had some of the better athletes at Lord Byng High School in Vancouver also played bridge. I mean, one fellow, Donnie Sweet, went on to become win a Grey Cup with the Alouettes as their kicker. And another, my friend Derek Sankey, ended up in the British Columbia Basketball Hall of Fame. He and I used to play as parents from time to time when we were in high school. They were very kind to play us. Now, here's another statistic. So we see back in 1958 how that, before I leave it, how that culture functioned. I mean, the culture itself was just organic. It continued to produce bridge players because it got passed down. And then the experienced players went to the ACBL because, bridge players like to play in their peer group. So if you really liked the game and you had some talent, you go looking for the strongest game. Well, the strongest game was in the ACBL bridge clubs. So you would go there. And either you would stay or you wouldn't. Some people would. My friends and I at a nationals once decided that maybe only 25% of us took up bridge as a recreation, but those other 75% who tried out duplicate, I mean our colleagues that we used to play rubber bridge with, they went home and they just continued to pass the game on. So they strengthened the rubber bridge culture. That ecosystem, which was supporting the whole situation, was strengthened by players, even if they didn't take up duplicate. And then that kept the duplicate games were always pretty strong. I know when I started playing, even though the bridge back in 1965 wasn't as good overall as the bridge today, the average player was better in regards to how much what the difference in skill level was between an average tournament player and a really good tournament player. But here's another statistic. You know, a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with a trusted source in the ACBL who was aware of a lot of the data. The ACBL, I asked them about new player development and retention. And he told me it was very disappointing that for new players who are brand new and take lessons at their local ACBL club, that 50% of them do not renew at year 1 and 90% are gone by year 5. Other programs that were designed to attract new players directly into duplicate were also judged to be very unsuccessful. It should be noted here that players who learn bridge as a rubber bridge player and play it for a few months will have a very high percentage of being a lifelong player. What I'm talking about there is that if you learned the game from your parents or from your friends, you're not under any kind of pressure to perform. And if you like the game, you'll find a group and you will play. Nowadays, bridge players who are brought in as new players right into duplicate, I'm not sure after they quit playing the duplicate game because it's too tough for them or they don't like being evaluated. I'm not sure that they keep playing. It's not possible, I think. The ACBL does not want to collect that information. They probably have, you know, a lot of demands on their data system, but it would be very good information to have. Now then, if we consider these two pieces of information, the article on Gorn and the modern data from the ACBL, well, what does it tell us? Well, the simple explanation is always a good place to start. And a simple explanation is that the overwhelming majority of bridge players do not want to play Mind Sport Bridge. I mean, nothing personal. I mean, it's a tough game. And you're evaluated, you're under pressure. And at the end of the day, I mean, most of the time you fail. I mean, how often do you like win every game? I mean, bridge is all about losing and coming back and trying to win. Trying to win. After a while, I want to give you a tip. You get smart about that, and you realize that someone's keeping score, and there's no reason for you to worry about winning and losing. If you just focus on the process about making the best bid and play that you can make, the winning and losing will take care of itself. I mean, that's easier said than done, but that's my tip. Anyway, they don't. I was saying that the vast majority of the players didn't want to play Mind Sport Bridge. They would rather play the world's best card game, the game of chance, rather than an outstanding Mind Sport. Therefore, trying to bring new players directly into a duplicate bridge environment is bound to fail. Right? And indeed, that strategy has failed for the majority of new players, as the ACBL data showed us, except, of course, for the very keen or talented who are going to end up playing something anyway. Often it will appear that they are becoming players. I mean, we're talking about the players who hang on, but the 1 year and 5 year retention statistics tell a different story. So if you run a new player group and they seem to be doing well for 3 months, don't count your chickens before you're hatched, because the stats show that in a few years they'll all start dropping out. So that's not meant to be a criticism for the way clubs are developing, but if they know that story, then they can continue to step in and try and prop up the enjoyment level of their players. And what I would recommend is to make sure that your players are playing in the proper peer group. It seems like a good idea to have these Flight C players slotted throughout the duplicates just to make the field look bigger or to make it more social. But I'm not sure that that's a good idea because the better players end up beating up the lesser players, and that determines the winner of the duplicate. It's better that the Flight C players, in my opinion, be playing in their own game, even if it's a very small game, and allow the flight A and B players to have it against themselves. Now, why is that? Why is it that new players don't want to play duplicate? Well, most people take up activities such as bridge as a recreation, not as a competition, and certainly not as a competition playing a game they barely understand. Remember, they're new and are just learning. They are not interested in being evaluated on criteria that they don't quite understand. At the end of a competition they did not want to enter. Well, neither would I, and perhaps neither would you if you were in their position. It's just not something they want to do. They want to judge their own experience on their own terms. Fortunately, bridge is such a great game that it can be played as a recreational card game at any level of expertise or peer group. Most bridge players in that 40 million played within their own peer group with people they liked and in a place that is comfortable. For those experienced players looking for a stronger game and stronger peer group, the card game of bridge can be modified without losing its fundamental character and played as a tournament and mind sport competition. And that's been going on since the 1920s. Even played auction bridge had a duplicate component to it. That was the game that predated contract bridge. So from at least 1925 on, there's been duplicate right alongside contract bridge, the card game. There's been duplicate bridge. Those players who want to try out duplicate bridge because there is a stronger peer group could always be found. Because there were experienced players who knew their way around a bridge table, excuse me just a minute, they were able to make a fairly seamless transition to duplicate. They could play the cards, they had a decent basic bidding structure, and they were strategically aware because part score competition in a good rubber game is very active. In short, they were exactly what a good duplicate would want in a new member. Now, it is fair to say that they were not ready for such an uptick in quality. And by that, I mean these players coming in were, wow, these players were saying, this group here is pretty good. They're better than I thought. And really, I've got a lot to learn. That's what I meant by they weren't ready for such an uptick in quality. So I think that is why even the friends of mine who started to play, most of them didn't continue. I remember there was only one of them, Dennis Dahl, was a friend of mine, and he continued. I don't recall that there was many more from our Lord Being group that did this. There was clearly a learning curve to becoming consistently competitive with the expert group, and some did not have the time, inclination, or talent to apply to such a project. So they returned to their rubber games, whether serious or more recreational, and continued to play regularly with their friends. What they continued to do, however, was to pass the game on to the curious friends and definitely to their children and grandchildren. In other words, they maintained the vast rubber bridge culture, the bridge ecosystem, and it was that ecosystem that provided a steady stream of experienced players to the organized tournament world, such as myself and I'm sure many of you. Through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, this culture grew older and the game was not being passed on. Less and less, in part because the younger generations had a myriad of other interests, but also from neglect by organized bridge. At that time, organized bridge was not only in North America, needed to step in and begin restoring recreational rubber bridge by going out into the community where card game bridge was being played and begin an extensive rubber bridge teaching program for new players. In other words, since the game was no longer being passed on as readily, they had to step into the breach and take on the role of passing the game on. Unfortunately, they did not perceive the problem, and most of us didn't, and take the proper action. When the average age of their membership started to rise rapidly and they realized that they were no longer attracting experienced players, they made a serious error and thought they could replenish their declining membership by bringing new players directly into MindSport Bridge, fast-tracking them, so to speak. Many gimmicky programs and MasterPoint giveaways were used to attract new players, but none of them succeeded long-term. Certainly not nearly as well as the organic ecosystem that just supplied them with a regular supply of experienced players. We, Organized Bridge, are grappling with the same issues today. The solution now in 1920 is the same as it has been for the last 40 years. We need to go out into our communities and replant the mother game. We need to become the Johnny Appleseeds of bridge. We cannot, I'm just going to say, we cannot continue to bring in brand new players into duplicate and hope for success. It's going to be marginal at best. So my proposal for the CBF, the Canadian Bridge Federation, is that become the agent for restoring the rubber bridge ecoculture, which is so fundamental for the survival of the game. Bridge is a fun and easy game to learn when played as a card game of chance by 4 people using rubber scoring. Consequently, it is an easy game to teach. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here, and I will make a separate video about why learning bridge by playing rubber bridge is effective and will produce a lifelong bridge player, as opposed to learning bridge as duplicate, and that the symbiotic relationship that we need to develop and then cultivate is that when there are experienced rubber bridge players who have been playing for a while and are looking for a stronger peer group, then we can get them right over to the local duplicate that will have a nice introductory program of some sort. I do not think that that duplicate clubs are ready. They don't have the right facilities to host new rubber bridge players. Remember, you're competing against golf clubs and winter clubs and homes and living rooms and whatnot. People are used to playing in nice facilities with their friends and in a relaxed environment. So until that happens, and that's a few years down the road, if ever, for duplicate clubs, we need to go into the country clubs, the golf clubs, the tennis clubs, the winter clubs, the community center. You know what I'm talking about? We need to go into there and teach them how to play rubber bridge. So fortunately, we have a best practices model in London, England, which has been very successful. We have one of the world's best players who also has a good bridge club. And rather than take up any more of your time, because these are all face-to-face bridge issues. And we're a long ways from face-to-face bridge, unfortunately. And however, apart from the tragedies in our families and our homes and whatnot, what we do have, the CBF and the ACBL, is that we can get ready for when face-to-face bridge comes back. And one of the things that I would like to do on the CBF board is these last 2 things I've been talking about: the national championship and setting this Canadian Bridge Federation up as an organization that's going to go out into the community with a really nice CBF branded curriculum and text and supporting materials, and begin to reestablish the rubber bridge culture, so that that later on the duplicate games will be able to have some experienced players coming in, and the duplicate clubs do not have to try and get new players to play duplicate. I think that's the main goal. It's a long range goal, and it doesn't really help. I know you're all members of the units. It doesn't really help you to support this program, it might seem, but in actual fact, that if we do not reestablish this culture, I'm afraid the game will die, because we won't have a supply of players for the duplicates. So let me finish off, if you would, just because I could, as I say, I'll make a separate video of this rather than take up any more of your time. I had a little something here. Well, rather than read something, I would just like to say that if you honor me with your vote to represent you on the CBF board, I will do everything I possibly can to present these proposals and to listen to feedback and do everything I can to put them into action, while at the same time making sure that I will listen very closely to your concerns and your issues. And without butting my nose into your ACBL business, I'll always be available for any sort of opinion you might want from me, as someone who's been playing the game for over 60 years with some degree of success, and always as a proud Canadian, even when I was in the United States, and always as a proud British Columbian. And I would do everything I could to earn your support in my role on the Canadian Bridge Federation board. So thank you very much for participating, and thank you very much for your service on the unit boards. Um, Obviously, the ACBL couldn't survive without the work that you all do, and I'm certainly available for a Zoom meeting with all of you ACBL board people, and maybe if we could get together, if you have any questions about my two proposals here, I'd be happy to go into more detail. Or if you have any other questions about what it is I intend to do or would do and how I would interact with you, any of those things, please, let's have a Zoom meeting and we can chat. Also, you can simply email me, alangraves@me.com, if you have any questions. Anyway, thank you, and good luck in your bridge, by all means, and good luck in everything else, and goodbye.